It was wonderful. But I say I was in a very privileged, luxurious situation because the Arsenal team did all the hard work. Oksana and I got to do the fun part. Like, we got to come up with the ideas, and I was somehow excused from doing all of the actual real planning. I was brainstorming topics and panels and people to invite, and Oksana and I were brainstorming together. We've been having Zoom meetings since August. It's a really fantastic team. I mean, that was one of the reasons I agreed to do it, because I never agreed to do things like this. But one of the things I heard was that this is a really exceptional team. They're really competent, they're really intellectually serious. They're going to do the hard work, you'll like working with them. And that was true. It was an incredible experience. What was most kind of moving to me when I came was the visuals, because we had been talking all year on Zoom, but I didn't have a sense of the scale of the art, of the design. And so coming into this three-dimensional space after having just been on the screen was kind of extraordinary. And seeing these ideas that Oksana and I had thought up and worked out in dialogue. We were passing back and forth a Google Doc when we were working on the curatorial essay. She would write something and I would write something back, and she would write something and I would write something back. And then seeing fragments of that on the wall turned into art was kind of spectacular. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, there was a question of thinking about, fantasizing about what would be really interesting combinations of personalities to bring together. And who, for instance, who's never been to Ukraine, would it be possible to bring to Ukraine? And who would be willing to come in these circumstances? And whose family would allow them to come, in these circumstances? And I knew that we were going to invite people from abroad, and many, if not most of them, were going to say no because it would be too difficult or too frightening, or maybe not too frightening for them, but for their children or their partners. And so I was thinking, do I even have a right to ask people to come? If I'm going to make this decision for myself and take a risk for myself, it's one thing, but, can I ask other people to come? But I did. I did, and I'm glad that I did, because I also feel like to be here now is a very special experience. And I feel like people do have a sense when they get here of it being a kind of privilege and a special experience to be here, not despite the war, but in some ways precisely because of the war. Oksana and I created these ideas. We asked these people to come. We thought of these combinations of people. So you feel a very different responsibility. But in some ways, I also feel like a participant. I feel like I'm enjoying what other people have created here, just as much, as I'm a creator. I mean, this festival is obviously on a scale that's much bigger than anything 1 or 2 or 3 people could do on their own. And so I also very much feel simultaneously a participant. And the number of people coming out who are interested in listening to these conversations on really serious topics. It's not light entertainment, right? The number of people coming out to listen to these conversations, the number of publishers that are publishing through this war, the quality of the artwork, the fact that I found this very moving, that there's a children's area. I mean, I think of this because I have my children are now old enough, they're teenagers, that they don't need a children's area, but all of these years when I was with them, our universities don't have children's areas, and you have this beautiful children's area, and people can bring their kids, and then they have these sensory experiments for the kids and art workshops, and so I also feel like a participant discovering it for the first time, because I wasn't here for any of the physical preparations. I was here for the dialogues, over the internet. It's definitely, has it changed my way of thinking? It's made me realize I need to be more open to group projects, but it was such a good experience. And I'd say I like thinking dialogically. I really enjoyed working on the curatorial essay with Oksana. And I like that dialogical form. Each person retains their own voice. You don't have to compromise on any of the wording, you're responding. But the other person is pushing you to have thoughts that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were just thinking yourself. Any kind of understanding of other people possible at all. And all the more so in situations of extremity, and of extreme suffering. Are we able to understand others? And in some ways, all of the humanities is an attempt to try to understand the other. And it's never going to be perfect. You're never going to perfectly understand someone else's experience. But all of culture, in some ways, like all of the humanities, is based on this leap of faith that some kind of understanding is possible. Even if it's not perfect, even if it will never be transparent, and maybe it should not be transparent. There's something totalitarian about transparent access to somebody else's soul. But can we get closer? Can we try harder? Can we kind of go in from a different angle? Can we get a glimpse, of someone else's experience that allow us to make this leap? Yes, I've been to the Lviv Book Forum, I've been to Lviv Media Forum, I've been to the book festival in Dnipro, but this is my first book arsenal. So I haven't had a chance to see everything yet. I've been kind of taking in the artwork, I've been taking in the plakati. Yeah, I took pictures of a whole bunch of the plakati. The range of the discussions, like the poetry readings, what does it mean? I mean, Yurko and Yara just had this conversation about what does it mean to translate in wartime? What does it mean to look for foreign literature in wartime? I was very happy I could bring Mark Isaac, and Gabriella here, to talk about the art photography project they've done on contaminated landscapes. So the fact that all of these people, are coming out to listen to these conversations and to listen to them very intensely, at this moment when people could just be hiding in bed under the covers, but they're not. They're here. I mean, it gives me hope. I mean, I feel like I've been in a state of despair about what's going on in my own country. It's been a very difficult time, I think, in the world in general. I also came here feeling like after the way Zelensky was treated in Washington, I am so ashamed, and so angry, and I feel so guilty, even though obviously, I wasn't directly contributing, but I'm a part of that society. The way the Russian oppositionists are part of a society in which they feel ashamed, in which they feel disgusted, but nevertheless you bear responsibility because you're part of that society. And I thought if Ukrainians don't want to speak to Americans ever again, I would understand. Because I watched that Oval Office meeting and thought I will, like, the disgust and the rage and the shame that I will, and so I came here feeling all of that, and now I feel like I'm here and I'm just kind of drawing all this good energy and hopefulness, from Ukrainians. Kind of paradoxically, I feel more hopeful and more optimistic about the state of the world here than I do anywhere else. I mean, I've been in this very privileged place in Toronto all year, which is really quite relatively safe, feeling like the world could end at any moment. And I come here and I feel like, okay, life is still going on. Like somehow there's going to be Perimoha. Like we're kind of like, at some point Perimoha will come, and life will go on. And I feel that way more here than I do anywhere else.